The views expressed on the following program are not necessarily those of WPSL. However, you are encouraged to like and share them on Facebook and other social media. What is going on? It's time to find out. It's time for the Sue Ellen Sanders Show with Sue Ellen Sanders.
Welcome to the Sue Ellen Sanders Show. We're so glad you're here. And, the legislative session is over, and we're still talking about some of the results, and we're still seeing some of the results, and we're lucky enough to have with us today our own state representative, Delores Johnson Hogan, to talk about what went on over the last year in the state legislature and what we're going to look forward to the future. Representative Johnson, you this is your first year in the legislature, and let's talk for just a few minutes about what prompted you to run for state office, and a little bit about your background for people who don't know.
Thank you, Sue Ellen. Thank you for the opportunity to be on with you. I have, in my late teen years and in early adulthood until now, I've always been involved in some form of politics, usually starting with get out to vote, voter registration, voter education, and just continuing to watch our local entities, the city council, city commission, as we call it, county commission, state and the national level, and have had friends in national politics.
So has it always kind of been on the back burner that this might be something you would do yourself one day?
Locally more so than
Yes.
anything,
Yeah.
As opposed to being on at the state level, and the opportunity presented itself. Larry Lee, who was our good friend, close, longtime friend, had been talking with me, and they were trying to find someone to run that would be a good fit, and
For the district.
for our district,
Yeah, and follow through on some of the things that Larry's done.
Yes, and my concern and my part of the other side of part of my background rather has dealt with our environment and how precious it is. I've long believed, when I came back from grad school at UCF, I got really involved with the League of Women Voters, the Conservation Alliance of St. Lucie County. Lace Fatunak and others were very instrumental in getting me involved, Betty Lou Wells, all of them, because the quality of life, I saw early on that the quality of life is dependent upon clean air, clean water, and clean land.
And of course, as a lifelong educator, you're kind of used to guiding people to take the next step. So whether it be middle school kids or high school kids or college or grown-ups or adults, full-on adults, it's something that you're comfortable with and that you feel called to do.
That's a good description, a good calling. Part of my professional career readiness I was director of social services for the Fort Pierce Housing Authority. So you can understand the socioeconomic level of people who lived in public housing. So I enjoyed getting them involved in education and in their children, and teaching them how to take care of a house, because some of them at the time, and this was in the 70s, public housing wasn't plentiful for many, many years here. So teaching them the importance of having a decent place to live. From there, I went to the city of Fort Pierce. I worked as affirmative action officer and also dealing with um, employee relations. That's the part I liked best, working with supervisors and their um, people they had working under them. So
To
that was
help
always,
them and advise
yes,
them
to
on,
do, I mean, treat your
yeah,
employees right. I
yeah.
remember saying, and I had this conversation just recently with someone, and I would always say, you let the employee fire themselves, but as a supervisor, you make sure that they understand what their job is and they understand how to do the job, um,
Because there's
and work with
nothing
them.
worse than having a job where you're not really sure
Sure.
what the goal is.
Right, and afraid to ask.
Yes.
Those kinds of things. So with public housing, we dealt with, with job fairs and on a small scale, of course, nothing like they have now. But I've always said, and I didn't articulate it as much and as quickly as I do now, but I'll readily say people do not value what they don't pay for.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm
It's very true.
a strong proponent of people having value in themselves and their skills,
Mm-hmm.
pride in their house, in their home, and in their community, and wanting to do what's best for this community. I was born here, as you said, and I love it. And I encourage people to be a part of it, and from my environmental standpoint, don't throw trash on the road. I've been out picking up trash, even in my own neighborhood, and I still live in my old neighborhood, but just looking at my work experience, working with the city, going into finally public education.
And how did you make the change into public education? Was there a particular reason why you decided to do that?
Well, when I was the city of Fort Pierce and thinking about going back to school, this was in about 83, I had always thought about the law or counseling.
Mm-hmm.
So, of course, as a lawyer, you're a counselor of sorts.
Yeah, yeah.
But you don't touch the people like a counselor would. And I had developed skills. I had a strong intuition about people. And there are people who recognized it along the way. I remember someone telling me, you have a strong instinct about human nature and people, and you connect so easily.
And then sometimes it's hard to get to a point where you're using those skills and that intuition to build people up, as opposed to just gather that knowledge. And you have to find the right fit for the right job in order to do that.
Exactly, because it's amazing when you talk to people and find out, and they could be as strong appearance-wise, but their ego is down, their self-confidence is down. So, you have to be able, a good counselor will see those kinds of things in people.
At the middle school and the high school level, it always has seemed like the most blustery and confident of the kids were always the ones that were not as quite as confident and sure of themselves as they appeared to be.
That's right. That behavior masks a lot of things, and you have kids who are in classrooms who act out.
Mm-hmm.
And, if you watch them and talk to the teacher, you see that they don't want to be called on, or if they were, reading aloud, those kinds of things.
They don't want any type of attention at all.
Yes,
Yeah.
and bad behavior will get them out of that, so to
Yes.
speak. But when in education and looking back at my career there, I started out in 1986 after I got my master's, because I decided not to go to law school. And Jerry Barlow hired me at Dan McCarty Middle School, and I'd always thought when I thought about counseling going to high school, but it was a blessing for middle school because I found out they don't know which way is up. They're growing mentally, physically. Oh, it's
There's
quite
so
a dynamic.
much change that's going on in
dynamic
middle school.
age, hormones, growth spurts, everything, and parents feeling frustrated.
And you talk about needing a village at when you're in middle school or when you're teaching middle school or when you're parenting a middle schooler. I think those are the toughest years at all.
They are. They really are. And I remembered I stayed at that position for a while, and I became a school social worker. So that gave me an opportunity to go into homes.
Right.
And to see where our children come from. And that
Which made a big difference in where they were going.
That gave us a boatload of information, so to speak, because it helped, because I would then share that information with the teachers, with administration, to help them understand why this child acts this way.
And a lot of times from the teacher's perspective, when you're sitting there and you've got 150 students coming in and out of your classroom all day, and 28 or 30 just in that one class, you don't see beyond their behavior in your class. You can't. You've got so many other things that you're dealing with, and keeping the balls in the air that you need.
Right.
You need the teamwork of the
team,
counselor.
That village you spoke of. Yeah. Most assuredly. And after I got out of the social work, I was dean of students, they call it conduct counselor, dean of students, dealing with discipline. I did 5 years at PSL and 6 at Lincoln Park, my alma mater. And that's where I stayed. I went back, back in the sense of an employee back in 96, and stayed there until my retirement in December of 2017. But it gave me again an opportunity to deal with all facets of the students. I've taught a couple of years. My first 2 years were elementary, and once in special ed also. So middle school, high school, and for 8 years I was a guidance counselor at the college.
So you had the experience in several different arenas, having to do with adults and helping them understand what they needed from the community, what they could get from the community, all the way down to the middle school and the high school and the college level of where they can get the help they needed or how to ask for help. That's right. I see that's one of the biggest problems with youth today. So over the course of your career, you've seen a lot of changes.
Yes, I have. Yes, I have. At my school, one of the things, and there's more and more, and rightly so, emphasis put on mental health issues with our children.
Yes.
And with middle school, because of the natural growth and the hormones and all of this, trying to fit in. Where do I fit in? Those kinds of things. It's heavy on them. I was assigned, I think the last 4 or 5 years, I was like the crisis type counselor too. So I dealt with students, and in several, it was alarming at the middle school level, who were cutting, and a few at the high school. So, and that's a very, very delicate walk in trying to get them to open up, because we had teachers who would be sources of information and fellow students. Students, on the one hand, they could be oh so ugly, but then they could be caring, so caring. And when we had the students who let us know things, and you have to handle it in such a way, they don't want to be ridiculed or anything or snitch, tattletale.
Yeah.
But they care.
Right.
And it's a beautiful thing to see. And then get that student in, and then, of course, get the parents involved and get the help they need.
And, the whole stigma of mental health makes it even worse because
Yes.
sometimes, and I've seen it from both the perspective of a parent and of a teacher, sometimes when a child or a young adult needs extra help, the parents or the child might be hesitant to ask for it because they don't want to be labeled as other, labeled as different.
Right.
They want to be just like everybody else.
You've got that, and you've got their parents and families. And I saw it when I was a social worker with the Housing Authority, and, of course, seeing it at school, that their families don't want to admit that anything is wrong with their family,
And
with their children.
And the issue with that is if you don't admit there's a problem, then you can't get help.
That's right.
So that aside, I just have a question. Do you ever sit there in the House chambers and look at the adults around you and think about them in terms of what are their motivations and what are their limitations and why they're acting the way they're acting? So are you ever you're ever
Yes.
sitting there wearing your guidance counselor
Oh,
hat?
People ask me, well, how did it go? What is it like? I say, much prayer and fasting.
Yeah, I loved your attitude the last time I saw you in Tallahassee, and you said that you're praying and having a blessed day, and you said that's a good answer for no matter what day you're having.
That's right. Well, part of that dealt with, I was on the campaign trail, and I was at, I think it was a group of union members, and one guy said, Miss Johnson, if you win, when you go to Tallahassee, you're going to be in a den of vipers. How are you going to handle that? And my eyes stretched a little, but I didn't hesitate. And I said, by the grace of God.
Yes. Yeah.
And then somebody else said, that's a good answer. And I said, hey, that's the only answer
That's the only answer.
That's the only answer.
And they may not be all the vipers they first appear to be, because you can look at them and you can kind of picture their middle school selves.
Right. I can, and there's so much youth around me.
Yes.
Overall, I love every one of them. Their motivations truly are different. The party that's in power, it's prayer. We've had, kind of easing on into the legislative atmosphere in the House. Some of them, I think, have gone to extremes with the power that they have, and unfortunately,
Power begets power.
Mm,
We remember Macbeth. Those of us in education,
That's
yes.
but it's and people want to hold on to it. Some use it well,
Yeah.
very well, but there are those who don't. And some of the things that hurt my heart to witness is the lack of a desire on some of their parts to engage the public, their local, in their district, their municipalities, the cities within their district, and the county people too.
And they're elected by those people. So
Yes,
they're
yes,
answerable to those
yeah.
people. And you're making a good point here, because you're not the boss of them, they're the boss of you. To put it in middle
Yeah,
school lingo.
Right, you're not right. Oh, they love that. You're
Yeah,
right. You remember it.
because they elected you, and each and every one of the other legislators that are there, they were all elected.
They're representatives. When I talk to people, especially since I've been back home and talking to different groups, when I was on the campaign trail, I would always paraphrase uh, Abe Lincoln when he was on the battlefield at Gettysburg, and the bodies and the death that was there. But he held out hope for this nation. And he said, this government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth. And I use that term and I say that, and my heart has embraced it so dearly. And I remind you, this is all of ours.
Mm-hmm.
We just send people up to represent us.
We do.
To represent us. And we've got, as electors, the populace, we've got to remind those we elect. And I include myself.
Of course, yeah.
What is right for the community? And sometimes votes don't go the whole way, but we've got to think about it as legislators. We have to think about, yes, our districts, but overall state, what is best for the state. Unfortunately, that's not always what
everybody else is doing.
Yes, right.
Yes. So what have been the issues that you have been most involved with during this first year up in Tallahassee? What are the things that are most near and dear to you?
I'll start with, they give us assignments, committee assignments, and I'm on 2 education committees. One is the main education committee, and the other is education quality. So you can think about what quality means. And then the other is utilities and energy. And one is ag and natural resources, and I'm the ranking member.
What does that mean, ranking member?
Like kind of the third in seniority.
Okay.
So that was a pleasant surprise.
Yeah.
But this first session was quite a learning session. I've observed it for many, many years. But as I tell people, is altogether different when you're there in the mix, and you see the personalities. And overall, I find that they're very kind and cordial to each other. But the party in power gets their marching orders, They've come up with bills, and we offer amendments, and most times they're not accepted, and they're good amendments.
And it's really interesting when you talk about the party in power, too, because the party in power was chosen by the people, and there was a very narrow margin. So it wasn't kind of a resounding, yeah, this is the direction we're going. It's like, well, we're all in the boat together, and we all need to get a row and row together.
Way,
yes,
yeah, same direction.
Yeah.
But there are many opportunities, in looking at some things that I worked on and co-sponsored. One that comes immediately to mind, and it was a cooperative bill. The both sides of the aisle, so to speak, supported it, and that was the dignity of women and incarcerated women, because they came on the Hill and they visited the different representatives and talked about their plight and the lack of dignity with just personal items that they weren't getting, or being searched by mail, those kinds of things. So that bill, that was bipartisan support, for that.
Okay, so what about, and you were in the high school and the middle school as a guidance counselor just a couple of years ago. So when that bill allowing teachers to be armed hit, what was your reaction?
I got up on the floor and I spoke to that, and I said, we have very bright children. I said they will spend a great deal of time among themselves figuring out who has the gun and where is the gun. Don't do that.
And it's really a scary thing that so many of the legislators are not have never been inside the school looking out. They've always been walking their kids to class in kindergarten, and then
Right.
that's it. And yet the teachers union and the education community was also, no, we don't
Right.
want
Right.
you to tell us that we can have a gun. And yet they made the decision anyhow.
And it looked like at one point that part would go away.
Uh-huh.
But when it was first brought up, I made the statement that, because I know in committee, they're not going to be required. They're not going to be required. Well, when a principal asks a person, especially a young person, and they want to stay at that school, they want to stay in the good graces of, who's going to turn a principal down if they
Yeah.
ask them?
Yeah.
And they won't be academic courses.
Well, we're going to continue talking more about this because you know that I'm passionate about it too. And we're going to
Yes.
talk about the direction we're going. We're going to take a quick commercial break. I have Representative Delores Hogan Johnson with me in the studio today. You're listening to the Sue Ellen Sanders Show. We'll be back in a minute with more. Welcome back to the Sue Ellen Sanders Show. And again, my guest is Representative Delores Hogan Johnson, State House of Representatives. And Delores, Representative Johnson just spent her first session in Tallahassee. So it's been a little bit of a learning curve, but you've had a lifelong passion for helping people as a guidance counselor, social worker, being involved. When we went to commercial break, we were just talking about some of the changes that Tallahassee is bringing to the education community. Among them, the ability for school districts to have teachers that are armed in the classroom. So, as a former high school teacher, I can't imagine. It's hard to keep things locked up, and it's hard to keep secrets as a teacher. And as you said right before we went to break, the kids talk, and they're going to know which teacher is armed and which teacher is not. And you think those kids aren't going to be goading those teachers or looking for the gun?
The curiosity of
Yeah.
students,
Yeah.
why should time that needs to be spent on education and other academic interactions, because to a student, to a kid, that's fun.
Mm-hmm. It's a challenge. Yes,
yes,
it's a
exactly.
challenge.
They are smart. They
Yeah.
will sit and talk. Man, I wonder who has the gun.
And God forbid there was an emergency situation. If a teacher got the gun out, what would happen if, for example, they froze and they weren't able to shoot it? Or if local law enforcement arriving on the scenes identified the young man in khakis and a polo shirt with a gun as the bad guy? When he was really the math teacher.
It's I just
Boggles my mind.
it does. I
Yeah.
mean, there's so many what ifs, but I would really like to see, professionals, because in the debate and questions, those kinds of things coming up. Oh, they'll have X amount of training. But like you said, with certain active shooter situations, emergency situations, sometimes training goes out the door.
You don't know
You
how
know.
you're going to handle
Right.
something. Teachers, a lot of them, or people are trained in CPR too. I mean, everyday people are trained in CPR, and yet some kid is, stop breathing, and you see them on the side of the swimming pool, and you still don't know how you're going to react until the situation presents himself.
Comes up.
So it's not just with guns, and no matter how much training you have, you're not you didn't
gonna be
choose to
different.
go in law
Right.
enforcement.
Well, we look at Stoneman Douglas and the SRO that was assigned there.
Yeah, exactly.
We found out, I mean, he's going to be charged, but we further found out that part of their choices was not to go in.
That was one of
Yeah.
his options.
Right.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So training.
So, yeah. So,
So
what if
those
you
are-
were inside the
Yeah,
school?
so we've got to really think about that. And I think one of the day we were debating the issue, there was maybe Pasco County or some county, some SROs, and they announced it, on the floor that this deputy sheriff's
His gun went off. Yes,
and
I remember
luckily
that.
it hit
Yeah.
the wall behind
Yeah.
him.
And he's again someone who's been trained
That's right.
all his life in handling a gun. So somebody who's received what 120 hours of training.
Yeah. But again, I think this is an opportunity when I speak of government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Please speak up and speak out. As this progresses, a law can be undone.
It can be.
And so I ask the citizens to pay close attention to this.
And lucky for the schools and the different school districts, there was a provision that allowed different districts to opt out.
Yes.
And St. Lucie
Yes.
County School District,
Yes.
God bless them,
Yeah.
is one of the districts that has.
And I am so proud of the citizens of St. Lucie County. They showed up and they voted.
to vote for that referendum.
Yes, to vote for the referendum because it was three-pronged. First, dealing with teacher salaries, and of course, safety, and that would including the SRO, the money's there, and one that's really near and dear to my heart also is the mental health for help
Yeah.
for our students.
Because when you look at the big picture, sure, the carnage would not have been as bad without the assault rifle and without the tools, but also if the young man who had killed all those kids and adults at Stoneman Douglas or in any of the other, is it hundreds now of school shootings over the last 2
It
decades?
seems like it.
It's not an unusual occurrence anymore. And not just schools, actually, the courthouses,
Right.
the other areas where movie theaters, where you feel like you're not safe, and it just seems like this is the kid putting his finger in the dike of the explosion of the violence that is in many ways a result of mental illness.
Very much so, very much so. And that's why we have to get at it at all levels. And
not just in the schools.
Right.
We're talking about across the board.
Across the board. And that speaks to families that they need to get help for their family members. Again, there's too much shame involved in
The
it,
stigma,
pride, the
yeah,
stigma
yeah.
that's associated with that. I help a group, and I've been a long-time supporter of United for Animals, John and Susan Parry and Janice, and they deal with spay and neutering of animals, and they've been around town, make dog houses, but they've seen the cruelty. I've seen the cruelty that people show towards some of these animals that they've tied up, and that is a telltale sign when children and even young adults are cruel to animals.
Yeah. And you do, and actually my daughter, who you were her guidance counselor actually, studied her master's is in forensic psychology, and
Wow,
one of the
great.
classes that she took dealt with the motivations of serial killers. And they look back and they can trace many of the killers, who, by the way, none of them are or terrorists from another country, or illegal immigrants.
Right.
By and large, they're a bunch of white
Homegrown.
guys with mental illnesses.
Sure.
To make a judgment call, which I'm allowed to do because I'm not a state legislator. But, every time they flash one of those pictures on the TV screen, I'm like, well, of course. Well, of course. So this is something that is an issue that needs to be addressed, nationally.
Yes, on so many levels.
And at the state, and approaching it through the need for mental illness treatment and identification is important. And, as you pointed out, passing referendum 4 allowed us as a school district the funds to put the safety officers in the schools, the resource officers
Because it
in the
was
schools.
going to be a budget issue. The sheriff's department, the county could not afford, to put, an officer in every school. So there had to be money. So the citizens stepped up to it. And oftentimes, and that's why I say that when referendums or need for funding for a special project to help the community, if it's presented to the citizens and they feel good about it and strong and that it's a righteous effort.
And it passed in St. Lucie
Yes,
County by 2/3
yes,
of the
60,
voters. 2/3 of the
66%,
voter.
Yes.
So that was
And they
a
said-
large and resounding, yes,
yes.
we want to support public education.
Yes.
So let's just make that little segue there to supporting public education and the frustration that you must have of dealing with state issues where the direction seems to be privatizing education instead. Yes, we need to continually improve our public education.
Oh, yes, it's needed.
And there's continued growth at all county levels, not just in St. Lucie County, but throughout the state. But let's talk about what's going on now in the government that is creating the situation where it's easier for private charter schools and private other schools. What are others than charters are called? Religious schools.
Private.
And then other schools that aren't necessarily charter but are privately funded and run. They're getting a lion's share of the funds that were appropriated for public education.
Yeah, they're getting scholarships of all types, and they've raised the income levels so high, that it's frustrating. Again, I sit on the 2 education committees, and oftentimes when I do speak, I preface it with, private and charter schools have their place.
Because they do. There's
but
some
yes,
awesome private and
private
charter
schools.
schools that are out
Very
there.
much so, but never, ever at the expense of public education, because they cannot educate the masses, as is part of our history. I talked to a superintendent recently, and they just had their meeting, and I understand Secretary Cochran was there and talked about pulling even more money from public schools to go toward
Is that possible?
They're trying.
Yeah.
They're trying, and they're calling now. I guess the buzzword that they're starting with now is non-charter public schools.
Okay.
The traditional
Yeah.
public education.
Right.
Because in our meetings we talked about public,
Okay.
public schools, traditional public schools, and then the charter public schools, because they'll press that issue. It's public school, but it has no accountability. I mean, it has to come through the school board to get an okay.
it has accountability, but not to the public, and not
right.
yes.
Yeah. To
So it
those
may be,
people who are in the business of charter
and
schools.
it is a business, and right now
Yeah.
it's a very lucrative business.
Yes, and there's a movement to increase the numbers. To increase the numbers.
Well, that seems to be the direction
Yeah.
that the state of
And,
Florida
you know,
sadly is going in.
And one of my things has been, we have been, and I've spoken this on the floor and in committees, that we've been very careful that this does not resort or revert back to resegregation.
Because there's a likelihood that it could.
Yeah, that's a very real possibility. So we have to be vigilant. I got calls, emails after the referendum here in St. Lucie County that they said, I voted for public education. But right on the heels, it was said, you've got to share that money with charter schools.
And moving forward in the future, any referendums that are passed or referendum money will have to be shared with charter schools. Yet, they're getting so much more of a share of the pie of the education funds that are funneled through the state now.
It's moving in that direction, and it's sad to see. But again, it's an issue that the people have to speak up and speak out about it.
Is anyone going to listen?
The citizens have to make us listen.
Okay.
And, you know, I use the term, make us hear you.
Yes.
Make us hear you. And along with that hearing, because to me hearing and listening are two different things, but listening is really understanding what is being said.
So let's just take a moment and talk about what's the best way to let your voice be heard. If you're listening to this show and you have an opinion and you want it to be heard, what's the best way to do it?
Contact the elected officials. Call me, email me. If you have friends, because oftentimes legislators who are impacting the entire state with their legislation live in other areas from where we live. But if you know people who live in those counties and cities, tell them, wake up, listen, pay attention to what's going on.
You can reach out through regional organizations too.
Oh, I've said that there's power in the corporate groups. I mean, you know, like school board associations, citizen groups, superintendents groups,
or organizations
groups.
Of plumbers, or
all of that.
You know, other types of workers, people who work at retail, people who work in the restaurant industry. There's all types of different organizations.
And unions make flood, let them hear us.
So, and do it politely.
Please, respectfully.
Yeah, respectfully. You don't have to curse anybody out.
That's right.
You don't have to be nasty about it, because a lot of times the first person who gets that information would be Tangi, your aide, or Mary Alice. And
that's right.
You know, you want them to be able to communicate the information.
Yes.
So either in writing or by phone. It's so easy to contact you by email. And that information you can contact through the state office, it goes through the state of Tallahassee, and then state of Florida, House of Representatives.
And they have a list of everybody.
And your office, your local office, is actually located in City of Fort Pierce City Hall.
Right.
So a lot of people may not know that you're that close, and you could stop by, and Tangi's there year round, and so she could take a message for you if they stop by.
Very good. I have excellent staff. People were asking, is she still there? Yes.
Yes, she
Both
is.
of them are.
Yeah, they are.
I'm learning the ropes. When the legislative group met in January, I said that I was her 6th trainee.
Yes.
Her representative. She's worked, so she knows.
So she knows the ropes, and You mentioned the committees you're on, and one of the other things I know you're very passionate about is the environment.
Yes.
So we've got a few minutes more. Let's spend a little bit of time talking about
All right.
that and talking also about this next legislative session and what you're doing to prepare for it.
Okay. With the past legislation, one of the things that dealt with the PICO money in the college, we're very pleased with that. All of the legislators, our senators, and our representatives are pushing to get the college the money to build the Advanced Manufacturing Center on campus. And one of my, the thing I really pushed most with our appropriations chair for that was the fact that it's going to be serving 4 counties. It's not just St. Lucie County.
So it's covering a bigger piece
yes,
of
Okeechobee,
the area.
Indian River, Martin, and St. Lucie. And I'm sure once it gets going, there will be people from other counties coming because there's great vision. There are fantastic things happening at IRSC.
Sure, and to have them receive the accolades that
The
they
Aspen Prize.
Yeah, the Aspen,
Yeah.
the top of
Yes,
community
yes,
colleges
yes.
in the nation. So, and again, they don't. You talked about when you're representing us in Tallahassee that you got to keep being mindful of the fact that everybody's got to come together and everybody's got to get a little this, a little that.
Yes,
But you're
yes.
talking with IRSC about impacting 4 counties.
Yes.
So that's a big piece of the pie there.
Yes, very much so. And so we got half of the funding that we requested, and the chairman said, "Well, come back next year." I said, "Oh, we will."
Oh, yes. So
'Cause
that's
it's
going to
a
be
worthy and a righteous project.
That's
So
on the
we're
top of the
excited.
list.
Yes, we're
Yeah.
excited about that. And we had Treasure Coast Food Bank.
yes.
We got some funding. We were asking 9. I think we got over 700 for that. And so, of course, we're calling Tallahassee. Make sure governor signs off on all of this.
Yes.
Because, again, Treasure Coast services 4 counties.
It services
Yeah.
4 counties, and one of the things that they've launched more recently, is the summer feeding program
Yes,
for all
yes.
those kids who are on free and reduced lunch during the school year,
Yes.
and then during the summer,
Right.
they
They're
may
planned out on
yeah.
25th. I had the privilege with Ms. Garofalo, I think her name is, and Ms. Cruz.
Krista, yeah.
We did a tour there
Yeah.
and just see the commercial kitchen they've set up, and they're training people to work, and they're doing, they're working with the farmers and everything too, so they can cryovac, seal foods and freeze them, and they don't have to send off their product anywhere. It can be done here. So they wanted to buy a building to expand all of that. And again, it's 4 counties, more citizens.
And there's a lot of neat things that they're doing in planning for using and reusing leftovers.
Yes.
Because restaurants, the school cafeterias, there's a lot of places where there's leftover food, and if you can cryovac
Vac, mhm.
that and then
Seal it.
freeze it,
Mhm.
then it can be used in another situation and
That's
not
right,
just
feeding
thrown away.
during storms.
Yes.
I mean, they're full force, helping with that and feeding programs doing, when the electricity, all of that is out. So it's a worthwhile thing. And the other thing we're pushing, we did get some funding for the muck removal out of Taylor Creek because it leaches into the lagoon. And but we're still pushing for more, and I'll be at the pushing for more environmental issues because, again, clean water, clean air, clean land for our quality of life.
Your committee meetings will start to pick up again in September.
Right.
And then your committees will meet September through
December.
December.
Because the session starts, I do believe, on the 14th of January.
So it's earlier this
yeah,
year.
in even years it starts in January, odd years it starts in March.
Oh, I see. So then this is really the only time that you're going to be spending as much time this summer, and you got to balance other things in your life with that too,
because you're.
It really cracks me up that this is considered a part-time job.
Yes, and sometimes what?
Yeah. But if people want to reach you, they can reach you on any issue, and they can either reach you at the local office or also by email too. And we'll post that information so people can be in contact with you, and then people can also contact us here at the radio station Monday through Friday. But what else does the future hold for this year? For are there any other things that, if you could have your dream agenda for the things that you got done, what would it include?
Passing the highwayman's license tag bill to honor the highwayman artists.
Okay.
And that money's with the tags, we have to pre-sell at least or sell at least 1,000 tags. But it was a very bipartisan issue, but it got railroaded in the Senate. So
wow.
I'm going to be pushing for that because monies will go toward the museum, plus 15% would go to St. Lucie Education Foundation for art projects and those kinds of things.
Which,
too.
by the way, just goes to public schools,
yes,
not to
that's our plan.
Yes, that's the rest. So figuring out a way to get some more funds. And do you think that there'll be any big changes this year when you go back in September to the committee meetings?
Not any super big changes, but I'll know.
But you'll be
September.
Experienced. That'll be a big change because
Yes.
you've already
Be
gone through
lobbying
your first.
more, how to push your bills. They call it work your bills. So
Yeah.
a lot more.
And
walking the halls.
What advice? What advice do you have for people who want to be more involved in government? How do you start? Where do you go?
Pay attention. I would start at the local level.
Start at the local level.
Attend commission meetings, school board meetings. Pay attention.
And
to what's
vote.
going.
Vote. My goodness gracious.
There's power in the vote. There's power in the vote.
You've been listening to the Sue Ellen Sanders Show. My guest has been Representative Delores Hogan Johnson. Her office is over at Fort Pierce City Hall on 100 North U.S. Highway 1, or you can contact her by email at dolores.hoganjohnson at myfloridahouse.gov, and we'll have that information for you here if you need it. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for the privilege. I appreciate it.
And thanks for listening. We'll be back next week with more.
Archives of the Sue Ellen Sanders Show are on YouTube under WPSL TV.